All right, first I want you to look on the table. I have a chart for you guys that you can fill out, and it's about the man and the message, and we're going to get to that in just a little while. And if you guys want to just write down these dates in Nisan, the 14th, the 15th through 21st, 22nd, and 24th, we're going to go over what each one of these are and how they actually pertain to Daniel chapter 10. And we're going to get to those in just a few minutes. A little bit more housekeeping. We are going to start the book of Ezekiel on March the 5th. So if anyone wants a book, I need to know no later than February the 9th. That's a week from this Sunday, so that I can go ahead and order the books on the 10th to make sure that we have enough for everybody to study. So with that in mind, let's do a little bit of reviewing to kind of catch up for these last 9 chapters of the book of Daniel that we've been studying for all these weeks. The theme of the book of Daniel that we've seen repeated at least 4 times in the first 6 chapters is that God Most High, El Elyon, is the ruler over the realms of mankind, or some versions will say the kingdoms of men, and he bestows it to whomever he pleases. And so the timing of chapters 1 through 6 are chronological. It goes from Nebuchadnezzar all the way through, and it does mention Cyrus and the Medo-Persians. And who are actually in the first 6 chapters, who is actually having the dreams?
The king.
The kings. The kings are having the dreams, and who's interpreting them?
Daniel.
Daniel is interpreting them. So, chapters 7 through 12 fit in the time frame of chapters 1 through 6. They're kind of tucked in there, and they are also chronological, but there could be many, many years in between each one. And some of them don't have time phrases, so we really just kind of have to kind of guess, I guess, where they would fit in. But during chapter 7 through 12, who is having the visions now?
Daniel.
Daniel. And who's interpreting them?
An angel or God.
Right, an angel is interpreting them right through God. God is telling the angel is telling Daniel, which makes sense because angels are messengers. So, how many visions does Daniel actually have? Or how many has he had starting from chapter 7 up until now in chapter 10? How many visions does he actually have? What we would consider visions.
2.
2? What 2 do you consider visions? Do you consider them all different visions?
No, it's the same one.
Right. That's what I think too. I think it's the exact same vision. It's one vision. It's just interpreted in many different ways. Not necessarily many different ways, but it gives more insight into that vision, into the vision of chapter 7. And I think chapter 7 is kind of this big picture, and then chapter 8 gets a little smaller, chapter 9, and then chapter 10 it is just a little bit different. Because they consider, Daniel actually says that this is a vision, but it's not really a vision, it's just another conversation. With this person that he meets by the Tigris River. I don't necessarily consider that a vision because I think it actually did happen. It may have been I think it really happened. Anyway, so I don't think that this is like some vision like we saw with Nebuchadnezzar when he was sleeping. I think it was more like Belshazzar when the hand came and actually wrote on the wall, and then Daniel had to come in and interpret what.
So you think it was actually he was awake and he saw and had a conversation? Because it does say he had companions, but they didn't see his vision.
Right, but they did run away.
They ran away.
Right. So I think part of this, I think it is. I think that at least the beginning of this, and we'll talk about that some more when we get to the verses about what happened with Daniel and when it happened. But I think in the beginning, at least, I think he actually saw. I think it was a physical manifestation along the same lines, but not along the same lines, like Balaam's donkey. I mean, the donkey saw the angel, but Balaam didn't see the angel. So I think it's kind of the same thing. Daniel was allowed to see, but the other guys weren't. But even though, well, we'll get to them in just a second. Let's keep going. Let's keep these things in order. We're just going to jump everywhere. All right, so what is the time phrase in chapter 10, verse 1?
It was the third year of Cyrus's reign.
Third year of Cyrus, what year are we in now?
Is it 536?
536. We're in somewhere around 536. So, chapter 10 would then be somewhere between chapter 5 and chapter 6, but after chapter 8. So we're still chronological, so it's after chapter 8, but it would be somewhere between chapter 5 and chapter 6.
Before 8.
Between 5 and 6, but before 8.
Before 8, okay.
And how does this chapter start? It says that there was a what that was revealed?
A message.
A message. That message, or some translations say a word, that is actually the same word as a revelation. There was a revelation. Daniel was given a revelation. And what kind of a message is this revelation?
One of great conflict.
It's great conflict. But he understood the message and he had an understanding of the vision. So he already understood.
It wasn't anything new.
Oh, exactly. So what vision did he understand, or what message? It said he understood the message and he understood the vision. Well, what message and what vision? Because so far in chapter 10, nothing's been vision. Nothing's come up. So what vision is he talking about?
From the vision of chapter 9?
I think from the vision of chapter 7.
Chapter 7.
I think he's finally starting to kind of piece this in his mind. Because if you go back to chapter 8, verse 27, it says, I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. Then I got up and I carried on the king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was nobody to explain it. But then by chapter 10, which of course is many years later, about 17 years later, he's saying, you know what, I understand. I understand the message, and I understand the vision. So he actually has understanding. Now, in verses 2 and 3, it does give us the historical setting. He'd been mourning and fasting for 3 weeks. He'd set his heart on understanding, so he was evidently, while he was fasting, and he was praying. He was fasting, he was mourning, and he was praying. And I'm trying to find the right color marker here that matches what I wrote over there. So, let's look and fill out our chart about Daniel the man and Daniel the message. So, if we're just looking at the first, well, just what we learned about Daniel. We know that Daniel is a man of high esteem. We saw that last week. And we're going to see it again this week. We know that he sought understanding. That's understanding. We know that he mourned and he fasted and he prayed for how long?
3 weeks.
For 3 weeks. Sorry about the shorthand. And we know that he also humbled himself before God. And now I'm writing sideways. So, Daniel was highly esteemed. He sought understanding. He mourned, he was fasted, and he prayed for 3 weeks. And we know that he humbled himself before God. The message we know from verse 1 said that it was true. We also know that it is one of great conflict. And who was the only one who saw it?
Daniel.
Yeah, so Daniel is the only one who saw it. And it says that it is going, or that this message, it's going to tell what will happen to Daniel's people. And who are Daniel's people?
The Israelites.
The Israelites, the Jewish people. That will happen to Daniel's people at the end of days. And some may say the latter days. And this is actually the entire theme, what happens to Daniel's people at the end of days for all of chapters 10 through 12. So for the rest of the book of Daniel, that's what it is explaining. It is explaining what happens, or what will happen to Daniel's people, the Jewish people, at the end of days. And that's carried out throughout the rest of the book.
So are you suggesting that it's going to be during the tribulation?
We don't know. I think this is another case or another example of near time, partial fulfillment of prophecy, and then latter tribulation or messianic, the messianic age, or what we call, what is that? The millennium. But I think that's when we'll see a full fulfillment of this, and we'll get into that a lot more when we start actually looking at the explanation in chapters 11 and 12, which we're going to start in like a couple of weeks. Because next week, your homework this week was really short. Next week is not that short. So don't get used to the short homework. This is the only short homework we've had so far. So in 4 through 9, let's look at this messenger that just kind of showed up. Where is Daniel, according to chapter 4, when this messenger showed up?
By the bank of the great river Tigris.
You know where the Tigris River is? It's in Persia.
Yeah, Persia.
It's in Persia. And when did this guy show up? What day is this? What time phrase do we see in 24?
On 20.
It was the 24th
day of the first month.
24th day. In verse 4, it was the 24th day.
Of the first month.
Of the first month. And the first month happens to be the month of Nisan. Anybody know what happens on the 14th day of Nisan?
Passover?
I'm going to be kind enough. Yes! Passover, which is Pesach. Pesach, which is Passover. The 15th through the 21st, then would be unleavened bread. Forgive my spelling. This board doesn't have spell check. The 22nd is first fruits. Now, even though the Jewish people probably were not celebrating the feast while they were in captivity, what would Daniel have at least known about this time of the month? What would he know was going on the 14th, the 15th through 21st, and the 22nd of Nisan? He would know that these feasts were coming. He would know. Now, his mourning, if you take his mourning period, when he said he was mourning and he was in great distress and he was praying and fasting, 21 days would be basically the 3rd of Nisan, right? Mm-hmm. So whether he's mourning and looking for this because he knows what happened, what do the Jewish people celebrate Passover? What are they celebrating?
The Passover of the angel when they were in Egypt.
Right, when they were in slavery, in captivity in Egypt. And God redeemed them from that captivity. Well, where are they right now?
In captivity.
They're in captivity. And what has Daniel already established is about to happen?
They're about to get out.
Yeah, they're about to be redeemed again. Now, unleavened bread is about purging of sin. What was part of Daniel's confession in chapter 9? What was part of his confession?
Well, the sin of the nation.
Yeah, the sin of the nation. How they'd been rebellious. They didn't obey his commands. They didn't obey his ordinances. They hadn't even listened to the prophets when they spoke. And so the whole unleavened bread is that purging of that leaven or that sin in their life. And Daniel had already prayed that in chapter 9. Now, the 22nd of Nisan is first fruits. And that's when they celebrate the promise of a harvest, of a plentiful harvest. When the first fruits literally came out of the ground, they took that, and that was their sacrifice. That was their first fruits offering. They didn't know by taking the first of their plantings that came up, the first of their crops, if anything else was actually going to grow. They could be sacrificing, giving God the only thing that was ever going to come out of the ground. So this is a great act of faith, to actually pluck, your crops when you need them to eat, and you give them as an offering. So it's an offering in expectation of a future blessing. Why were they in captivity for 70 years?
Disobedience.
And because they didn't give the land its
rest.
Yeah, it's rest. And so what had the land been doing the last, for the 70 years that they're in captivity? What's the land going to be doing?
Resting.
It's going to be resting. Well, if I'm Daniel and I'm thinking, wow, we're getting pretty close, because I'm about 66 years into captivity now, and I know that things are getting really close, and I know now, my gosh, it's the 3rd of Nisan, and I'm starting to think about all these things, and I'm thinking, wow, we're about to go home. And God's going to redeem us, and He's already prayed a couple years before about purging their sin and the land and how it's going to be, and if they're going to have this bounty and be able to eat when they get there, because the land had been pretty much decimated by the Babylonians. And then 2 days later, who shows up? This man in linen. And so when you look at this man that nobody else saw, in verse 5, what does it say about him in verses 5 and 6? This is not just some normal person that walks up to Daniel.
Yeah. His body was like beryl, his face had the appearance of lightning, his eyes were like flaming torches, and his feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and his sound like the sound of tumult.
Right, which is a roaring sound.
Yeah.
His belt was pure gold. He was in linen, so he was very white.
Was this Jesus, or was this?
No, I believe no. I don't think it was. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. I don't think this was. And it says his body was like beryl. Beryl, I looked it up. It's a yellow, serpentine kind of color. So it's a yellow guy with stark white, with a gold belt around him, with face like lightning, so I'm thinking bright, eyes like flaming torches, and his arms and his feet are like polished bronze, and his words are roaring words. Is this a human being?
No.
No. I was hoping nobody would want to argue that point with me. Does anybody want to argue the point?
But see, that sounds a lot like what Jesus would be described as. That's why I know it was talking to the angel.
Right.
But that is a very ominous picture of an angel.
It is. But did it seem like Daniel was afraid of him?
Well, at first, because the angels even told him, don't be afraid.
But that was later on. So when he looked up, he just says, I looked up, and here is this man in linen, and this is what he looked like. And obviously, Daniel's standing there staring at him, and everybody else who was with him was probably just going along their business, but they knew something was wrong. They knew something was not quite right. Because just because Daniel saw him, everybody else got scared and ran away. But Daniel didn't. So, I want these words that you see, you should mark them and really connect them. It's 8 times in only 9 verses. You see it in verse 6. It's twice in verse 9, the sound of his words, sound of his words. In verse 11, you see it 2 more times. Understand the words, and he has spoken the word. And then in verse 12, it's also twice. Humbling yourself before God, your words were heard in response to your words, Daniel's words now. And then down in 15, this man in linen spoke to me according to these words. So really, if something is shown 8 times in 9 verses, you probably want to go ahead and mark those, and then I just draw, lines connecting all the words, and if it's across the page, I just connect it across the page. So, when all of this is going on, and we look, excuse me, when his friends ran away, and we look at verse 8, what was Daniel's reaction to this?
It says that when he was left alone, his strength had left him. My natural color had gone out of him, and he retained no strength.
And he had no strength. But he heard some words, and as soon as he heard his words, he fell into a
deep sleep.
Now,
that is when he saw a vision. Yes.
Well, he said in verse 8, it said, I was left alone and saw this great vision. I'm thinking the vision is not necessarily kind of like the dream visions like Nebuchadnezzar had, or the dream vision that Daniel had previously. I think the vision is like the vision of this man. Yeah. Like I saw this man, that kind of a vision. I don't think it was the same kind of dream visions like we think when we think of, people having visions in the Bible. I think it was just when I saw this vision in front of me, this man in front of me, dressed in linen, that this is what happened. He had absolutely no strength left in him. Well, how could he have any strength left in him if the poor guy had been fasting and mourning and praying for 3 weeks? I mean, I'm surprised he was able to walk out to the Tigris River. I mean, I'm surprised he was able to even do that. And have his companions who are probably there, to be with him, to stay with him, and probably to make sure, he was going to make it back. But he had no strength left in him, and it says he fell asleep. I think we could take this 2 ways. Well, 3 ways, but I don't think. The first way, I know it wasn't. When we hear someone fell asleep in the Bible, what is that usually equated with?
They died.
Yeah, they died. And obviously Daniel didn't die. Other times when people fall asleep, then that's when kind of their vision begins. We'll see that in Ezekiel. He fell asleep, and then he was taken, but Ezekiel was transported, to different places. Daniel wasn't transported. He was still right there. I mean, he's still there in chapter 12, beside the Tigris River. So I don't think he went into this dream state, and this new vision was suddenly going to happen. So I think his fell asleep was just a really nice way of saying Daniel fainted. That's me, because I know he didn't die. He never says he went into a dream state and was, transported or saw, something new or whatever. So I really do think it's just really nice to say he fainted.
Oh, he hadn't eaten.
Well, exactly. He hadn't eaten. I mean, this is a big shock to the system again. He hadn't seen an angel for a few years, and obviously this has really been plaguing his mind. He's really been thinking about this a lot. While he's still got to serve the kings, while he's still humble, while he's still, by this time, while he's already been thrown in the lion's den, it just, things keep piling up on poor Daniel. He's lucky he didn't have a nervous breakdown. I probably would have just been curled in the fetal position, sucking my thumb in a corner somewhere. But I mean, and Daniel's old. Daniel's not young. Daniel's an old guy here, and somehow he just keeps going and going. Goodness bless his heart. So, it says the angel touched him, and he got up. Daniel was able to get up on his hands and knees, but he was still trembling. And then look in verse 11. And what does this angel, or this man in linen, what does he tell Daniel? What does he call Daniel?
A man of high esteem.
Where have we seen Daniel being called a man of high esteem before? Chapter 9, verse 23. And we're going to see it again in Daniel chapter 10, verse 19. So we'll see it in just a few more verses. Daniel held his integrity throughout his entire captivity, under 2 different pagan kings and 2 different pagan kingdoms. 3 if you count Darius and Cyrus as co-joint, kings. We know Daniel was a man of prayer. We know he was gifted by God with understanding, and even understanding of these dreams and these visions. We know when he was falsely accused and facing the lions, he never relented. He never He even said, okay, I'll fake it. I'll just fake it. I'll say I'm worshiping him, but I'm really not going to. He didn't even fake it. He ministered humbly to Nebuchadnezzar and to King Darius, even after these guys tried to have him killed. Both these kings tried, with all of their good intentions, to have him killed. And yet when he didn't die, he still served them loyally. He was still very loyal. He faced Belshazzar with confidence. He even knew what God said was going to happen. He knew it was going to happen. And yet he still stood very boldly in front of Belshazzar. And in front of, hundreds and hundreds of people that were at this party. He confronted sin. He lived righteous without any compromise and regardless of his circumstances. So that's a man of high esteem. That's a man who is a precious treasure. This is a man, we ought to be emanating. Is that the right word? Emanating? Anyway, this is the kind of man we ought to be. This is who we should aspire to. Because his circumstances changed constantly, but yet he never did. He held to what he did from the age of 15, 17, all the way through his entire life. And if you look in verse 12 says why this man in linen came. So, Oscar, you want to read verse 12 for us?
Then he said to me, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this, and on humbling yourself before God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words." So, he came because Daniel had already set his heart. That means he was already setting himself to understand the vision that he had seen. He saw this vision in chapter 7. We're now in chapter 10. The time frame between those two is 17 years. So for 17 years, this has plagued Daniel, and he really wanted to know what the understanding was. The first time he asked for understanding, he said, I want to know full understanding. I want to know everything there is to know about this vision. And that's what he wanted to know. And so I don't know if he knew that he was only getting pieces of it, or if he only knew really God was giving him a little bit at a time. Progressive revelation, because that's all he could really handle at the time. Because, after God gives him, or through the angel, these explanations, we see that Daniel doesn't do so well. Daniel's sick. Daniel's tired. Daniel's mourning. Daniel's, exhausted for 3 weeks. He's exhausted for days, but then he gets up and he keeps right on going again. But these things have to plague his mind. It has to. So obviously, even though it was on his prayer, on his heart, in his prayers, even up to 3 weeks, now, this man in linen shows up to give him some more answers. And maybe that is what set Daniel to trembling. Maybe every time this guy showed up, in Daniel's mind, things always got a little worse for Israel and for Daniel's people, or what later in these chapters say the holy people, which was the Jewish people. Things never really seemed to get better for them. It was always kind of more doom and gloom, and things were getting kind of worse. So maybe when he saw him, it was like, my gosh, here we go again. Here we go again. Something else, another blow to the gut. It's coming. So that might have also been what kind of set him into just, fell out on the ground, and what caused him to tremble. In verse 13, this man of linen tells Daniel why it took him so long to show up, and what had been really kind of going on. How long, well, first of all, what was this man in linen doing? In verse 13. He was being held up by the king of Persia for 21 days. For 21 days. That word for prince is sar, and it could be a leader, a captain, a commander, but it can also mean a patron angel. And that withstanding, where it says that the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days, that means he was standing opposite me. Literally in kind of a war formation.
standing opposite me. And how long was he doing it for?
21 days.
21 days. How long had Daniel been fasting?
21 days.
21 days. So that's why this poor man in linen is saying, this is why I couldn't get to you from the beginning. I was kind of held up by this prince of Persia, who later on in the verse, at the end of 13, is actually called the kings, plural, of Persia. So obviously there was one, and then there end up being more than one. And who shows up to help?
Michael.
Michael shows up to help. And what does he call Michael?
The Prince of Israel.
The Prince of Israel, one of the chief princes of Israel. And if you want some cross-references for that, we'll see this again in Daniel 12:1, in Jude 9, and in Revelation 12, verse 7. From your homework on page 39, we went through and we learned a lot of different things about Michael. We learned that he's a great prince who stands guard over Daniel's people, which would be Israel. He's assigned as Israel's guardian angel. He stands firm against the spiritual forces that are attacking Israel. We see that he will arise for Israel also at the time of the end. And in Revelation 12, it's Michael and his angels who are warring with Satan and Satan's angels, and who ultimately wins?
Michael.
Yeah, Michael and Michael's angels are the ones who ultimately win. Do you think Michael is still Israel's guardian angel?
Yes.
I do too. I do too. I don't think it's changed. So, is this prince, or the king, or the kings of Persia, are these human beings?
No.
No.
Well, no.
No. In these verses, no, they're not. So then where is this war, where is this conflict actually taking place?
In the spiritual realm.
Yeah, exactly. In the spiritual realm, in the heavenly realm, and whatever you call that on the other side of the veil that we are not privy to see right now, and I don't want to see it right now, because then I'd be like Daniel and I'd be fainting. Then this is really interesting. In verse 14, it tells why the man in linen came. And it says that he came to give you, Daniel, an understanding of what will happen to your people, the Jews, in the latter days, because the vision pertains to days in the future. In verse 1, Daniel says he understood the vision. So if he understood the vision, then why did the man in linen say that he was going to come and give him an understanding of the vision?
Maybe he understood the vision, but didn't know when?
Is this the first time that Daniel has been told that this vision has to do with the future and the people of Israel in the latter days?
No.
No, it's not. It's not
That's
the
what I
first
said,
time.
Yeah, so he didn't know the time.
But I'm wondering if maybe he's saying, I'm here to give you some more understanding, some more discernment. You understand what I've told you thus far. And because you're still plagued about this, because you're still praying about this, because it's still really kind of eating you up inside, I'm going to give you some more understanding of what's going to happen to your people in those latter days, in those days of the end. Or it could be a much simpler explanation. And when Daniel is writing this, right before he tells it, before he tells us what this man in linen tells him, he could be saying, yeah, and kind of an afterthought of it, and when he did tell me, I understood it. Because this was obviously written after it happened. So he could have been saying, yeah, he told me this and I understood it. So either way, I mean, really, it's, one way or the other, or it could be some other way that we have no idea and I haven't thought about. And it really doesn't take away from what's going to happen. And those latter days, this has a lot of hits in it, so need to wet my whistle a bit. The latter days are called the Acharit HaMayim, and that's the end of the days when this kind of physical world where we can be sick, where we can be tired, where we have death, where we have sadness, and the physical world that we live in right now, which is called the Olam Hazah, it actually ends. It comes to an end. And when what's called the Olam Haba, which is the world to come, is about to begin. So when you see the latter days, the days in the end, that's the time when this physical world is about to end and the eternal world or the spiritual world, the Olam Haba, which literally means the world coming, is about to begin, which would be what we consider as Christians to be the eternal kingdom. So that's in a Jewish mindset, that's what that is. So whether they believe that's when the Messianic kingdom comes, and what we call the millennium, because then they will see Messiah coming, I don't know, because these are the only two real way they differentiate. The two worlds is the physical world, and then the world to come, which is the spiritual world, which does have God as a Godhead. So, we are moving right along. In verse 16, we meet what looks like, could be, someone else. In verse 16, who are we meeting now?
Man? One that resembles a man?
Yeah, one who resembles a man, or one in the likeness of the sons of man, or one resembling a human being. Where have we kind of heard this before, about this one resembling the likeness of a man?
Jesus.
Way back in
what is
9:21. It says, while I was speaking in prayer, then the man, which is the man, it's one coming in the likeness. It's not an actual, it's a hais. It's the form of a man, but it's not really a man. And he says that the man's name is Gabriel.
Oh, so it's not a Christophany?
I don't think so, no. But do you think this one who resembles a human being, which is also used again in verse 18, do you think that this is also the man in linen?
Possibly.
Or do you think it's somebody totally different?
No, it's probably the man in linen, because if it was somebody different, he probably would have described it differently.
So, do you think then, because this man in linen, it does not come in the appearance of a man, except he looks like a shape of a human being, but eyes on fire, lightning on fire. Do you think that that is, that maybe this Gabriel, this one who resembled a human being, do you think that he toned it down a little bit and became more human looking, like, you know, the eyes looked more human, the hands looked more human? My mind works in really weird ways. I can't help it. I'm sorry. I was kind of thinking maybe that's what had happened, because in verse 15, it says that when he spoke to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. This is the first time Daniel has ever described an angel the way he did. The color, the eyes, just the shiny form of a man, but not really looking like a human being. The only thing I can think of is like a gold or a bronze statue, looking, you know, shiny and with lightning or torches coming out of their eyes. So I'm wondering if Gabriel didn't become more human looking to be more of a comfort to Daniel. I don't know. Or maybe this one who resembled a human being is a totally different being that's showing up. Because after that, after we see him again, when it says, then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me, he's never called this human being or this one with a human appearance, or one looking like the Son of Man, or the Son of Man, or whatever, likeness of sons of man, which would be a person. He's never called that again. But he's also never called the man in linen again. So I'm not quite sure, you know, I believe it's Gabriel. You may not, and that's okay. And you may think the man in linen was not Gabriel, but this one is, and it's a totally different, you know, entity. And Gabriel's coming as a comfort to him. Because in verse 19 he says again, "O man of high esteem." And he wishes Daniel peace, and he tells him to be courageous, and he gives Daniel strength because Daniel just lost it again. So I'm not real sure. Because what seems to upset Daniel is the fact that this man in linen was actually fighting, otherworldly entities, like otherworldly, like angelic beings. That seems to be what upset him. Because he doesn't tell him anything else, except that he's about to tell him about the Hebrew people, the Jewish people in the later days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. And again, maybe Daniel's like, gosh, how much worse can it get? And that could have overwhelmed him. I mean, we're talking about spiritual warfare. We're talking about, something else now you're about to tell me that you haven't already told me. And what is it you haven't told me? Embracing for the bad news. And down he goes again. And it says he couldn't even breathe. He was so overwhelmed. But then in verse 20, this man who looked like a person asked a very, very interesting question. In verse 20, he says, "Do you understand why I came to you?" In Hebrew, that word is yadah. He's saying, do you know why I came? Didn't he, back in verse 14, tell him why he was coming? To give him an understanding?
Yeah, he is kind of jumping all over the place, huh?
Or, unless the man in linen is going to tell him, and Gabriel just says, do you understand why I came? But then it says, I shall now return to fight the prince of Persia. So that's what makes me think it's the same person.
Yeah.
So, does this question ever really even get answered?
No.
No. Do we really understand why Gabriel showed up at this point?
Nope.
No, because it doesn't seem that anything has even really been said that we don't already know. And if our little pea brains can read it and understand it, well then obviously Daniel didn't hear anything new either. So I'm not quite sure what it really was. And why he wants to ask, because he doesn't really answer the question. He tells Daniel he has to go back because he kind of left Michael fighting against this prince of Persia. But who's about to show up?
The Prince of Greece.
The Prince of Greece. This is the second time that Greece has been named as the third kingdom on the statue. So obviously Greece also has some demonic prince in the spiritual realm. Because Persia, he's fighting the Prince of Persia now, and he's about to fight the Prince of Greece, because the Prince of Greece is coming.
Which is why he says, no one else stands with me except for Michael. It's like...
And that's what makes me think also that it's Gabriel. Because we typically see Gabriel and Michael together. We see Gabriel by himself, we see Michael by himself, but when we see two angels together, we see Gabriel and Michael fighting together.
And I'm thinking even deeper than that, more or less. It's kind of a weird thing for him to say, and no one stands. Let's see, do you understand why I came? So I'm going forth.
It's the end of 21.
There's no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except for Michael.
Right, and that literally means nobody shows himself strong but Michael, your prince, and your prince Daniel, your prince, the Jewish people. But what's even more baffling, do you understand why I came to see you? But I gotta go. So I'm not going to answer it because I gotta go. Because poor Michael, I left poor Michael alone. I know what this dude is capable of, and Michael was good enough to come and help me fight against him. But now somebody else is about to join the fray, so I kind of need to go over here and help Michael again. So I'm going to go, but before I go, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth.
Yeah, but it doesn't explain it.
But,
I gotta go.
There's nobody to stand with me but Michael, so I better get going to help Michael too. And I think that's almost his way of saying, Michael came to help me. There's nobody else that can stand with me but Michael. So by proxy, I guess, there's nobody else that can go and help Michael either. So if nobody can help me but Michael, obviously nobody else can go help Michael, so I need to go help Michael. So, but I will tell you, and that writing of truth, that's actually the divine destiny of mankind, which would be, in this mindset, in this context, the Jewish people. So that's literally what the writing of truth is. It's the divine destiny of the Jewish people. I'm going to tell you, but I gotta go. And then the chapter ends. But, there's a big but, big contrast. Just because this chapter ends doesn't mean that the message ended. Doesn't mean that this, I'll just call him Gabriel, because that's who I believe it is. If you don't believe who it is, then when I say Gabriel, just fill in the blank with whoever you think it is. It doesn't end with Gabriel and it says, and Gabriel left. It doesn't say that. And if you look in verse 1 of chapter 11, it says, in the first year of Darius the Mede. If this was the first year of Darius the Mede, chapter 10
It's the third
was
year,
the third. How long ago?
It was 2 years back.
It was 2 years ago. What I want you to be careful in understanding is, this is not the time frame for all of chapter 11. This is just the time frame for this little explanation that we're about to get. And it says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, 2 years ago, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. Who is the I?
Gabriel?
Yeah, that's what I believe. So who would be the him? Him. Who would Gabriel arise and encourage and protect 2 years prior? Who would be that him?
Daniel?
Let me read these two verses together. I'm going to read 21 straight into 11, or 20 straight into 11:1 to make it a full thought, because these chapters and verses were not here. Then he said, this is the man who looks like a human being, the man in linen, Gabriel. Then he said, do you understand why I came to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of the truth. But there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces but Michael your prince. And in the first year of Darius the Mede, I actually rose up and to be an encouragement and a protection for him. So then who would the him be?
Michael?
Michael. Michael. That's what I believe. Because 2 years before this, or just a little like a day before, what was about to happen in the kingdom of Babylon? Way back in chapter 6. Babylon's about to be destroyed. And Darius is about to come on as the new king to usher in the Medo-Persians. Maybe, and this is a maybe, I mean this is just a theory, don't go preaching it, that this is what it says, because without a whole lot of studying, don't know, but maybe this man in linen was actually strengthening Michael to protect Israel against that time of the Medo-Persians coming in, because there was obviously a war. I mean, he didn't just walk in, kill the people that were, happened to be all in one place, and then everybody was nice and happy. I mean, this was a war. And so maybe he was strengthening Michael to become Israel's guardian angel, to be the protector of Israel at that time. Because up until then, there hadn't been a war. Israel had lived in peace. I mean, we read scriptures a couple weeks ago that God told them to be prosperous, to plant your fields, to eat, to make a lot of babies, because eventually you're going to have to go back home and you're going to need to be healthy and you're going to have to bring people there and repopulate. And so this was the first time really that Israel was in any kind of massive conflict since they'd been taken. So back in chapter 6, so I think maybe he was strengthening Gabriel to actually, and strengthening and encouraging him, maybe training, I don't know what a good angelic word would be, to become or to be Israel's guardian angel, to protect the people of Israel. I don't know. I don't know. But you are exactly correct that the I is Gabriel, so Gabriel is actually speaking, and he rose to become a protector for, or an encouragement and a protection for Michael. I do absolutely believe that. Because in verse 2, he switches completely, and he says, now I'm going to tell you the truth. And that truth is that writing of truth that he referred to in verse 21. So yeah, he needs to go back, and yeah, he needs to help Michael, but he is going to tell him this word of truth. So that 2-year time frame, or time phrase, is only good for verse 1. Because then we're back, and now that I've explained kind of how this spiritual realm kind of works a little bit, now I'm going to tell you what I promised to tell you. Although I should get back, but I'm going to tell you. And then this continues through the rest of chapter 11 and the rest of chapter 12. Which we're going to get to in a couple of weeks. So that's why I don't want to get too in depth. But now you all will be ahead of the game when we actually get to chapter 11 in a couple of weeks. Because you'll know who the I is, and you'll know who the him is from 11:1, and so will everybody if they watch the video. On page 39, letter E in your homework, we went through chapters 11 and 12 and made a list about Daniel's people, the holy people, the people of God, from those two verses. And our time is getting kind of, where are we? I don't even know what time it is. Our clock is perpetually 3 o'clock in the evening. So I'm just going to kind of run through these, and if you have anything different, or if you have something, more, or maybe that I missed, just stop it when I'm done and just let me know. But make sure to give us the references too. Hopefully you wrote that down when you were doing your homework. But I'm actually going to back up to chapter 10, verse 14, because the message in the Word was actually about Israel in the future. So I think we need to remember that. I think we need to keep that in our minds, as especially we go through chapters 11 and 12 and we find out these latter days and what's going to happen to the Jewish people in the latter days, so that we don't in our minds write ourselves into their history. In chapter 11, verse 14, it says, at the time of these events, in the immediate context, some violent ones will lift themselves up to fulfill the vision. What vision? The vision Daniel's been having since chapter 7. Not all of Israel are, or have they ever really been, true servants of God. I mean, come on, they've been in captivity for almost 70 years, for about 66 years at this point. And they didn't get there because they were just obedient to God. I mean, they got there because of their treachery and their evilness and their disobedience. So some of them probably still aren't followers of God. Some who were followers of God, their hearts could have been hardened against God. And so the violent ones might actually mean those who are willing to fight at that time. Fight against these people, or fight against the people who are coming up against Israel. We don't know. And without more studying, we're not going to know. And so I honestly did not go and do any more studying about that to find out who these violent ones are. So if you guys have an opinion, or if you guys want to go ahead and study that for next week, that would be awesome. That would be great. And we can take some time to talk about it next week. Those violent ones in 11:14. In 11:32 through 35, it says the people who know God have insight like Daniel. In chapter 12, verse 1, it says, when the time of distress comes on Daniel's people, those whose names are in the book will be rescued or delivered. And we will talk about that more, about these names, when we get to chapter 12. Chapter 12, verse 3 says, in the end times, those who have insight will shine and will actually lead many others to righteousness. In verse 10, it says, during the last 3.5 years of distress for Israel, so obviously we're now in the time of tribulation. So during those last 3.5 years, many will be purged, purified, refined, but the wicked ones will continue in wickedness. And we see that all throughout the book of Revelation. He calls them the earth dwellers. I call them the Eds. None of the wicked will ever have any kind of an understanding, because if they did, how would they continue in their wickedness? Especially when we see Jesus and God like right there. But where does this insight actually come from? Where does it come from? For the Israelite people. I think in knowing what God said, what God spoke to them in the book of Daniel. If they know and understand Daniel, then at the time, they'll know what's happening, why, and when it's going to end, and when it's going to begin. And that's, we do too. Because just because this was written about the Jewish people, it was still written for us, for believers, for everyone, so that we can know also. Because, we can look and we can say, this sounds really terrible. I mean, really, really, really terrible, and a lot of bad things are going to happen, and yes, they are. But there is still hope for us. There's redemptive hope. There's still a time of Passover. There's still going to be a time of purging of sin. And there's still going to be a time of first fruits when we do have that the provision. Now, these have been fulfilled with Jesus. And the fall feasts have not. These are all spring feasts. But we're still going to see deliverance. We're still going to see deliverance like they saw from Egypt. We're going to be delivered from the slavery of our sin of this world. Those who continue in this wickedness without insight, they're not going to purge their sin. They're not going to. But it says that we're going to be able to lead many people to righteousness. So some are actually going to purge their evil ways. They're going to come and they're going to look, on the Messiah, and they're going to recognize him for who he is. And then there will be a time of great abundance when our first fruits offering, when Messiah is there, and we don't ever have to worry about provision. We don't have to worry about our harvest, and we don't have to worry about the seasons and the time changing and whether it's going to rain or people coming and taking our stuff. We don't have to worry about that anymore. So, what kind of insight have you gathered so far from Daniel? I mean, I have a list, but I'm not going to share it right now. If you guys are not filling out your chart that are in the back of your homework, the What I Learned About God from the book of Daniel and What I Learned About Daniel from the book of Daniel, I really encourage you, and I know it sounds like a lot to go back now and do 10 chapters worth, but that's why you should have been doing it all along. But go back and do that, because a lot of things that we see about God and a lot of things that we see about Daniel are things that we should be putting into practice in our own lives. So, any questions, any insights?
What's the
anything?
24 for?
24 is when the man in linen shows up.
Ah, okay.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't do that, did I? But yes, that's when the man in linen shows up. And again, you guys, email me, call me, tell me after class, whatever. If you guys do plan on studying, I do need to know by February the 9th if I have any chance of getting our books.